For most of the series, Morty can be described as an impressionable boy who can be somewhat easily manipulated. Despite his apparent lack of intellect, Morty has shown himself to be a good listener who follows directions well. These traits make him the perfect sidekick to Rick, and this was established from the very first episode of the series. Morty is usually the one being dragged into Rick's adventures, reacting to the chaos around him and depending on Rick to explain what's happening. However, as the series went on, Morty slowly began to change. From season 5 onward especially, he started to mature beyond simply being Rick's sidekick. He began having more adventures separate from Rick, making his own decisions, and showing a greater willingness to stand up for himself, not only against Rick, but also against the rest of his family. Morty may still be insecure and emotional, but he's no longer just a scared kid who blindly follows Rick everywhere. This is what makes the darker and more unusual versions of Morty so interesting. They show what Morty can become when certain parts of his personality are pushed further. Evil Morty is the most famous example of this because he's the version of Morty who fully understands the system Rick created and chooses to escape it. He's not just angry at one Rick, he's angry at the entire structure that keeps Mortys trapped under Rick's. But Evil Morty is not the only version of Morty who challenges the usual Rick and Morty dynamic. The comics introduced several other versions who explored similar ideas in different ways. All of these versions are interesting because they prove that Morty is not limited to one role. He doesn't always have to be Rick's weaker partner, his human shield, or the nervous kid standing in the background. Depending on the universe, Morty can become a ruler, a revolutionary, a manipulator, or even the smartest person in the room. So in this video, we're going to look at Evil Morty and some of his most interesting comic book counterparts and discuss what each of them reveals about Morty's potential beyond being Rick's sidekick. Out of all the different versions of Morty, none have had a bigger impact on the series than Evil Morty. While the regular Morty slowly began standing up to Rick and becoming more independent, Evil Morty took that idea to its absolute extreme. He didn't want Rick's approval, he didn't want to be Rick's sidekick, and he certainly didn't want to live under a system controlled by Rick's. Instead, he became the first Morty capable of challenging Rick on his own level. What began as a simple mystery involving a Morty with an eye patch eventually evolved into one of the most important stories in the entire series, reshaping everything we thought we knew about the Citadel, the Central Finite Curve, and Rick's place in the multiverse. In many cases, he's considered as the one who started it all, Evil Morty. As revealed in Unmortricken, Evil Morty was once another Morty, constantly mistreated and dragged on adventures. One day he grew fed up with his Rick and got him blackout drunk while he engineered a device that would allow him to control Rick to be hidden underneath a black eye patch. He scalped him and attached the device to his brain. After that, Evil Morty teleported to the Morty Agency in the Citadel, killed the employees, and erased himself from the database. Apparently, his original goal was to destroy the rule of Ricks. He first appears in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, where at first it appears he's simply a sidekick to Evil Rick, assisting him in killing 27 known Ricks from various dimensions and capturing, torturing, and enslaving hundreds of Mortys to use them as cloaking devices to hide from the Citadel. The reveal that he was the one in control occurs at the episode's conclusion. A Rick officer conducting an autopsy on Evil Rick's corpse discovers the receiver, while Evil Morty in the Citadel quietly removes the eye patch and smashes the transmitter under his foot so they can't track him down. Earlier, Evil Morty hacked Rick C-137's portal gun and uploaded his own portal travel history and sent it to the Citadel authorities to frame C-137 so they could arrest him for the killing and kidnapping of Ricks and Mortys. Then Rick C-137 escaped and found out the source of the hack to go to Evil Morty's controlled territory by getting caught. Evil Morty downloaded Rick C-137's brain and found out that he created the Central Finite Curve. To escape it, he needed to get access to all the resources of the Citadel. A year later, in the Ricklantis mix-up, now going by the alias Candidate Morty, survived the Citadel battle in the Rickshank Redemption or was absent from the Citadel at the time. He secretly develops an alter ego to become a presidential candidate in an election for the newly democratic Citadel of Ricks. His candidacy is considered a joke by the Ricks of the Citadel due to being a Morty who no one takes seriously, including his campaign manager Morty. But after making a rousing speech about the class divide between the various Ricks and Mortys on the Citadel during the debate, he quickly earned praise and support. Shortly after the speech, he promptly fires campaign manager Morty. Campaign manager Morty is depressed and drinking heavily in a bar when an investigator, Rick, gives him a file revealing candidate Morty's past as Eye Patch Morty and true nature as being the one to have been controlling evil Rick. Horrified at the truth, campaign manager Morty tries to assassinate evil Morty to prevent him from winning the election and is quickly arrested. Unfortunately for him, evil Morty survived the assassination attempt and won. Although campaign manager Morty tries to reveal candidate Morty's true identity as evil Morty to the authorities, he is executed by being ejected into space with the file. The now President Morty meets with Rick leaders on a shadow council of Ricks, who tell him that they were the real power in the Citadel long before the Council of Ricks, and that he'll have no real power. He asks for those who feel this way to raise their hands. He snaps his fingers and all the Ricks with raised hands are swiftly executed. The remaining two instantly back down and cooperate. Evil Morty then sets his plans in motion by eliminating the old school that partnered Mortys with Ricks, creating new Citadel police rules that allowed a Rick police officer to go free after killing his Morty partner and turning himself into a dictator. He creates new banners and throws every Rick or Morty that opposed him out the airlock. Evil Morty begins the Dimensional Drive's construction to escape the curve. He then appears in Never Ricking Morty, where he is in an anthology created by Storylord. He's seen with his trademark eye patch along with a cyborg arm and cape. He leads his army against Rick and Morty. In Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty invites Rick C-137 and Morty to have dinner with him. He asks Rick to tell him how to bring down the central finite curve, but Rick refuses. He implies to Morty that Rick C-137 helped create the Citadel and says it's a shame that Rick won't help. Despite this, he should have what he needs anyway. Rick's brain was scanned during the appetizers. He had kept previous scans taken by Evil Rick and close Rick counters of the Rick kind. Just to make sure, he checks Rick's memories on the brain scanning device planted in the dining room. Morty apologizes to Rick for bringing him to the Citadel. Evil Morty expresses disdain for Morty's sellout nature, but says that it would be pointless to hate him for it. Mortys are bred by the Citadel for their forgiveness. The Citadel has become a self-perpetuating market for Mortys, with Citadel Ricks manipulating events to ensure Jerry's and Beth's end up together and creating endless Morty clones from their offspring. Rick tries to shoot Evil Morty, but the shot is blocked by a force shield. Evil Morty tells the guards to let Rick and Morty go. Rick opens a portal to leave, but after seeing Evil Morty's smug face, realizes that it's a trap. Evil Morty has hacked his portal gun again. After defeating the guards, Evil Morty tells Rick that he can't run from his past. Rick shoots at Evil Morty again, but the force shield is still up. Evil Morty asks Rick why he thought the shield would be down the second time. Rick says it's just him expressing disapproval at his dialogue. Rick C-137 and his Morty encounter Evil Morty again at the Citadel's Dimensional Drive as he is preparing to escape the central finite curve. Evil Morty explains to Morty that Ricks see themselves as the underdogs and in this way justify all of their heinous actions to themselves. They built the central finite curve, a multi-dimensional wall that separates all the infinite universes where Rick isn't the smartest man alive from all the infinite universes where he is the smartest man alive. Evil Morty says that what makes him evil is being sick of Rick and his toxic, immature, and sociopathic behavior. He professes in wanting to leave it all behind, and that any Morty who has ever been sick of Rick has also been evil Morty. Essentially, he is destroying the central finite curve and the Citadel to free himself of Rick. Evil Morty activates his Dimensional Drive protocol, powering it with the blood of Operation Phoenix clones to create an opening in the central finite curve. The Citadel starts to break apart, and Evil Morty offers Morty a chance to escape with him. Rick tells Morty it's a better deal than staying, but Morty chooses to remain with Rick. It is soon revealed that Evil Morty anticipated this and revealed the only thing on the ship besides the seat is a toilet. As Rick and Morty flee the chamber together, Evil Morty gets into his small spaceship. He flies through the opening in the central finite curve and uses his own portal gun, one filled with a unique golden fluid. In Solar Ricks, it's shown Evil Morty's plan included destroying travel with Rick's model of a portal gun. However, Rick C-137 wrote off the idea of taking Evil Morty seriously, claiming that he acted like he was quitting social media. In Unmortricken, Evil Morty continues on adventures beyond the central finite curve, gathering resources that will allow him to live a peaceful life in his space mansion. Unfortunately, his peaceful existence is disturbed due to Rick and Morty messing with dimensions within the central finite curve in a bid to track down Rick Prime. Annoyed, evil Morty confronts the two and gives Rick a tip to speed up the process, but is ultimately dragged into a Rick and Morty adventure when they're teleported into a prison set up by Rick Prime. Despite Morty's own objections, evil Morty and Rick team up to survive the prison using their combined knowledge and skill set to outsmart Rick Prime's traps and cooperatively hacking their portal guns to facilitate a joint escape. In the process, they learn that Rick Prime developed a weapon called the Omega device that is capable of killing people across infinity. After their escape, Rick runs off to get his revenge on Rick Prime. Evil Morty elects to follow, knowing the Omega device is too dangerous to allow to exist, and convinces Morty to join by advising him that Rick will not handle succeeding in his revenge well. They arrive at Rick Prime's lair, and evil Morty teams up with the two to defeat Rick Prime, at one point swapping clothes with Morty and feigning a reunion between Rick Prime and Morty, who is technically his real grandson, before using his resources to incapacitate Rick Prime. Dragging him into another room, he conducts a brain scan and downloads the schematics for the Omega device. Rick Prime, impressed by evil Morty's intelligence, suggests they could become partners like Batman and Robin. Evil Morty retorts he doesn't need a Robin, before pulling Rick's body in, reviving him, and offering a chance to kill Rick Prime. After shutting down the Omega device, he comments on Rick's dissatisfaction at getting revenge, before warning him and Morty not to bother him again by pointing out how he now has the power to kill Rick across every dimension if he so chooses. When Morty says he could just do it anyway, evil Morty replies that actually using the Omega device would cause him more headaches when he just wants to be left alone. He begrudgingly admits, having gotten the chance to work with him, that Rick has proven himself different from other Ricks. He muses he could find that useful one day, though he reiterates his warning that they not come after him as he leaves. Evil Morty returns in There's Something About Morty. Having rebuilt the Omega device and rigged it with a deadman switch to wipe out Rick, Beth, Summer, and Jerry should he be harmed, evil Morty blackmailed Rick C-137 into helping him defend the central finite curve from various threats. At one point during their partnership, Rick showed evil Morty some of his time travel technology, prompting evil Morty to make his own time stopper. When the collective approached the curve, evil Morty called on Rick again, only for Morty Prime to find out about the arrangement and join the adventure. After the collective had been defeated, the three went to a diner where evil Morty mocked his prime self while Rick went to the bathroom. Confident in his superiority, evil Morty allowed the two to depart until the next adventure before he returned to find his base destroyed with the Omega device's blueprints deleted and his number blocked by Rick having taken advantage of evil Morty's confidence to use the Omega device on its own blueprints. Evil Morty eventually tracked Rick and Morty down to a bunker dimension where he engaged in a protracted fight against Rick that shattered his force field and emptied his arsenal. Evil Morty then tried to take control of Rick's arsenal but was overpowered by the rest of the Smith family, prompting him to activate his time stopper. Before evil Morty could take advantage of this, he, as Rick predicted, was arrested by the time cops. After Rick apologized for Morty making it weird, evil Morty was sent to time jail. After a lifetime of being underestimated, manipulated, and controlled by Ricks, evil Morty became the one Morty who refused to accept the role that had been written for him. Unlike countless other Mortys who spent their lives following behind a Rick, he chose to break that system entirely, even if it meant becoming a villain in the eyes of the multiverse. From secretly controlling his own Rick, taking over the Citadel, destroying the central finite curve, and ultimately helping bring down Rick Prime himself, evil Morty transformed from a mysterious background character into one of the most important figures in the entire franchise. Yet despite all of his intelligence, power, and influence, his goal was never conquest or domination. More than anything, evil Morty simply wanted freedom, the freedom to exist beyond Rick's shadow, and beyond the endless cycle that defined the lives of countless Mortys across infinity. Whether he remains an ally, a future enemy, or something in between, one thing is certain: no Morty has changed the multiverse more than evil Morty. And judging by his final appearance, his story may be far from over. Of course, evil Morty is not the only Morty who eventually turned against Rick. In fact, one of the most interesting Morty variants from the comics explores a very similar idea but from a completely different angle. Like evil Morty, he grows tired of Rick's control and eventually rebels. He even shares some visual similarities, most notably replacing evil Morty's eye patch with a distinctive monocle. But while evil Morty wanted to tear down an entire system built by Ricks across the multiverse, this Morty's conflict is much more personal. He's not fighting against every Rick, he's fighting against the one Rick who created him. His story begins with a simple moral disagreement between Rick and Morty, a disagreement that eventually spirals into a revolution, dictatorship, and a confrontation that forces Rick to face one of his greatest fears: the possibility that Morty might no longer need him. Rick and Morty usually go on strange science fiction adventures, but this comic arc begins with something much darker. Rick and Morty travel to an alien planet where Rick plans to kill an injured alien patient. According to Rick, this alien will eventually become the Hitler of this world, so killing him now would prevent a terrible future. Morty immediately refuses to accept this. The alien doesn't look dangerous at all. He's injured, confused, and helpless, and Morty doesn't feel comfortable killing someone who hasn't actually done anything yet. Rick then explains that people on this planet age backwards, meaning this old-looking alien is actually closer to being a child. This only makes the situation worse for Morty because now Rick isn't just asking him to kill a future dictator, he's asking him to kill someone who's still at the beginning of their life. Rick sees the situation as the ends justifying the means. If one terrible action can prevent a worse future, then to him it's worth doing. Morty disagrees, especially after they see that the alien is friendly and grateful to be alive. Rick tries to force Morty to pull the trigger, but Morty refuses. When Rick tries to do it himself, Morty stops him and says they should give the alien a chance. If he really does become the monster Rick says he will, Morty promises he will deal with him in the future. This leads to a major argument between Rick and Morty. Rick is furious that Morty refused to finish the mission, and he takes back his promise to let Morty drive the space cruiser. When they return home, Beth tries to calm things down. She reminds Rick that Morty is still a teenager and that he can't force Morty to grow up all at once. Morty needs time to mature naturally. Rick later tries to get Morty to go on another adventure, even offering to let him choose where they go, but Morty refuses. Rick asks if Morty wants help with his homework, but Morty ignores him. When Rick tries again, Morty finally tells him the real problem. He says Rick has all the power in the world, so everything is easy for him. What Morty wants is for Rick to stop telling him to grow up and actually let him grow up. Soon after, Beth finds Rick surrounded by 5 strange children, including what looks like a younger version of Summer. Later that night, the house turns into chaos. Rick admits that he created a controlled and simple universe, but now that universe is rebelling against him. Its leader is hiding somewhere deep inside the world Rick created, and at the end of the chapter, it's revealed that the leader is another Morty. This is what makes this Morty interesting. He's not simply another Morty from the multiverse. He was created by Rick inside a universe that Rick designed to be controlled. His rebellion comes directly from Rick's desire to replace the original Morty with a version who would obey him more easily. In that sense, his conflict with Rick is more personal than evil Morty's. Evil Morty hated the larger system created by Rick's, while this Morty is rebelling against the specific Rick who created him, controlled him, and then abandoned him. His design also clearly references evil Morty. Instead of an eye patch, he wears a monocle. Evil Morty's eye patch was connected to secrecy and manipulation, while this Morty's monocle makes him look more like an open revolutionary leader. He's not hiding behind anyone. He wants Rick to know exactly what he's doing and why. Rick and Beth enter the created universe to stop him. The society there is built around revolutionary ideas, and they meet a character named Chad who believes Morty can only be defeated through disruption. His plan is to create a ride-sharing service that will provoke Morty's system. Rick thinks this is stupid and wants to destroy the whole place, but Beth convinces him to try the plan first. Meanwhile, Summer begins investigating what Rick has done. She uses Rick's garage to look into the history of this other Morty. She learns that after the original Morty refused to kill the future dictator alien, Rick created or found this new Morty and took him to finish the job. This new Morty seemed obedient at first, which made Rick happy. Rick even told him that he was superior to the original Morty. However, it becomes clear that this Morty was only pretending to obey. Back in the created world, Rick and Beth are captured after Chad betrays them. They're confronted by Jessica's soldiers and a younger revolutionary Summer who rides dinosaurs with her army. Rick explains that he added dinosaurs because he assumed every kid would want to train and ride them, which only shows how badly he misunderstands children. Eventually, Dictator Morty captures Rick and Beth, destroys Rick's portal gun, and traps them in this world. He then reveals his goal. He wants Rick to experience life as Morty. Dictator Morty forces Rick and Beth into a recreated version of an old adventure from Urban World. Morty says Rick never listened to him during that adventure and never cared about what happened to him. This version of the trial replaces the original dangers with dinosaurs, but the point is the same. Morty wants Rick to feel what it's like to be dragged through Rick's ideas without being respected or listened to. At the same time, Summer finds another portal gun and tries to enter the created universe. Jerry stops her, and the original Morty gets involved too. Eventually, Rick's garage gets tired of them and throws Summer, Morty, and Jerry into the portal. While Rick and Beth continue through Dictator Morty's world, earthquakes keep shaking the planet. Beth realizes the real problem. The children in this universe haven't grown up properly because Rick created a world where they would remain easy to control. She connects this to Rick's relationship with the original Morty. Morty is becoming more independent, and Rick is scared of that. Rick finally admits the truth. He is afraid Morty will stop needing him, just like Beth grew up and built a life away from him. Dictator Morty secretly watches this conversation, and Rick's words affect him. Even though he hates Rick, he understands what Rick is saying. However, the moment is interrupted when the original Morty, Summer, and Jerry arrive in the created universe and are captured by Revolutionary Summer. Beth then pushes Rick to explain what really happened between him and Dictator Morty. Rick finally reveals that during an old mission he sent Morty into a tower while he fought outside. Rick thought the planet was ruled by someone called the Brain, but it turned out to be a literal brain pod. Rick failed to protect Morty in time, and the brain pod infected him with a parasite. This explains Dictator Morty's strange eye and why he blames Rick for what happened to him. Later, Rick himself becomes infected by the same parasite. Dictator Morty says there's a serum that can save him, but he will only give it to Rick if Rick does one thing first. He wants an apology. At first, Rick refuses. He thinks Morty should be grateful because Rick gave him an entire world with freedom, dinosaurs, and no miserable adults. Beth reminds Rick that he already admitted he was wrong. Dictator Morty also admits that he doesn't really want to grow up either. He's afraid of change, but he still wants Rick to let him be his own person instead of someone Rick can control. Rick finally apologizes. He admits that he should have listened to Morty, and that if he had, the whole situation with the brain pod may have been avoided. Dictator Morty then gives him the serum. The earthquakes continue, and Dictator Morty explains that the children themselves are causing them. The rebellion and independence are destroying the controlled world Rick created. Rick wants to fix the planet, but Dictator Morty refuses. He doesn't want Rick to save everything again because that would only put Rick back in control. He tells Rick that if they're going to be free, they have to save themselves. Rick eventually listens. Instead of interfering, he trusts Dictator Morty to handle the crisis on his own. Rick, Beth, Summer, Jerry, and the original Morty leave the planet. After they return home, Rick's relationship with the original Morty seems healthier. Rick offers to let Morty drive the car, which is the same thing he took away from him at the beginning of the story. But this time, Morty politely refuses and says he doesn't feel ready yet. This shows that the point was never really about driving. Morty didn't need the car itself, he needed Rick to trust him enough to give him the choice. On the final page, Dictator Morty successfully saves his planet without Rick's help. His world celebrates him, and he looks up at the sky thinking about Rick. Despite everything, he seems grateful that Rick finally trusted him enough to let him save his own world. This is what separates Dictator Morty from Evil Morty. Evil Morty wanted to escape a system controlled by all Ricks. Dictator Morty's story is more personal. He wanted freedom from the Rick who created him, used him, abandoned him, and refused to listen to him. He is clearly inspired by Evil Morty, especially through the monocle and the idea of a Morty rebelling against Rick, but his motivation is different. He's not just trying to destroy Rick's control, he's trying to prove that he's his own person. Another interesting version of Morty from the comics is Morty 304X. Unlike Evil Morty, who wanted to escape the system built by Ricks, Morty 304X is an example of what happens when a Morty becomes consumed by his hatred of Rick. In many ways, he starts with a goal that seems understandable, but over time, that obsession slowly transforms him into the very thing he claims to oppose. Several years before the events of the story, Beth, Morty, and Summer were forced to flee their own dimension after their Rick destroyed their world. Using Rick's portal gun, they escaped to Dimension 304X in hopes of starting a new life. Once they arrived, something unexpected happened. Morty became a scientific genius. However, instead of using his intelligence to help people, rebuild society, or improve the world around him, he became obsessed with one thing: eliminating Ricks from existence. As the years passed, Morty accumulated more and more power until he eventually became the ruler of his world. Rather than solving his problems, this power slowly corrupted him. He became increasingly paranoid, authoritarian, and detached from the people around him. Eventually, even his own Summer abandoned him and joined a resistance movement dedicated to stopping him. Despite his intelligence, Morty faced one major limitation. The portal gun that had brought them to Dimension 304X was nearly out of power. While he could observe other realities using machines he created, he couldn't travel between dimensions himself. To solve this problem, Morty became obsessed with obtaining a working portal gun. His solution was to lure Rick Sanchez and Morty from Dimension C-132 into his world. To accomplish this, Morty ordered his scientists to create a monster designed to kill every Rick across the multiverse. He unleashed the creature and used the final energy remaining in the portal gun to attract Rick C-132's attention. The plan worked, and Rick and Morty soon arrived in Dimension 304X. However, they were immediately taken in by the Resistance, which was led by Morty's own sister, Summer. When Morty learns of their arrival, he becomes frustrated that his forces failed to capture them. Beth informs him that Summer took them to the Resistance base, prompting Morty to coldly remind her that Summer is no longer his sister. This small moment says a lot about how far he's fallen. His obsession with defeating Rick has completely destroyed his relationship with the people closest to him. Determined to destroy the Resistance once and for all, Morty activates a sleeper agent hidden within their ranks, Jerry. Under Morty's orders, Jerry detonates explosives and reduces the Resistance headquarters to ruins. Morty then travels to the site himself, where he finds Rick injured and unconscious. Seeing an opportunity, he captures Rick and takes him back to his headquarters, hoping to obtain his portal gun. While Beth attempts to interrogate Rick, Morty discovers that Summer and Morty C-132 have infiltrated his base and reached the room containing the portal gun. Morty confronts them using a massive combat walker and tries to convince Summer that they ultimately want the same thing, a world free from Rick's influence. However, Summer points out something Morty doesn't want to hear. In his quest to destroy Rick, he has begun acting exactly like one. In his quest to destroy Rick, he started acting like a Rick. The accusation immediately enrages him because deep down he knows there's some truth to it. Morty insists everything that happened is Summer's fault for abandoning him, but Morty C-132 offers a different perspective. Sometimes terrible things simply happen, and not every tragedy needs someone to blame. Hearing this finally breaks through Morty and Summer's years of resentment, allowing the siblings to reconcile. Unfortunately, the moment doesn't last long. Before they can fully repair their relationship, Jerry suddenly arrives driving a massive armored vehicle and crashes directly into them. What makes Morty 304X interesting is that he serves as a warning about obsession. Evil Morty wanted freedom from Rick's system, but Morty 304X became so consumed by his hatred of Rick that he slowly transformed into a Rick-like figure himself. He became a genius scientist, a dictator, and a ruler who believed he alone knew what was best for everyone else. The more he tried to separate himself from Rick, the more he ended up resembling him. However, while Morty 304X shows a Morty corrupted by power and obsession, the next version of Morty takes the idea in a completely different direction. Instead of becoming intelligent because of trauma, revenge, or political ambition, the next Morty comes from a universe where he was simply born the genius. A reality where Morty is the scientist, Rick is the sidekick, and the entire foundation of Rick and Morty is turned upside down. This is Genius Morty. He appears near the end of the third chapter of the Rick and Morty comics, and even though his role is very short, the idea behind him is actually one of the most interesting things introduced in the early comic issues. Most versions of Morty are usually portrayed as nervous, insecure, and less intelligent than Rick, but Genius Morty is the complete opposite of that. In his universe, Morty is the brilliant one, while Rick is the slow, alcoholic, and much less intelligent sidekick. Genius Morty was an extremely intelligent teenager who lived at home with his grandfather Rick. However, their dynamic was completely reversed compared to the Rick and Morty we usually follow. Instead of Rick constantly insulting Morty for being stupid or useless, Genius Morty was the one who constantly mocked his Rick for being an idiot. His Rick was still an alcoholic, but instead of being the smartest man in the universe, he was portrayed as a pathetic and unintelligent old man who could barely keep up with Morty. The comic shows that genius Morty was smart enough to be part of the Council of Mortys, and it seems like he was on good terms with them. This is already important because it shows that he was not just a random smart Morty. He had enough intelligence and status to be connected to a larger organization of Mortys, which makes him stand out even more. One day, genius Morty wakes up his Rick, who was having a strange dream where their intelligence levels were switched. In Rick's dream, he was the brilliant scientist while Morty was the dumb sidekick. This is obviously funny because this is basically the normal Rick and Morty dynamic that we know. However, to genius Morty, this idea is ridiculous. He mocks Rick for even imagining a world where he could ever be the intelligent one, and then tells him to come with him to the garage. When Rick gets to the garage, Morty immediately complains about how slow he is. He tells Rick to hand him a screwdriver, and while working on his invention, he continues mocking the idea of Rick being some brilliant scientist. To genius Morty, the thought of Rick being smarter than him is not only impossible, but embarrassing. This again shows how reversed this universe is. Rick is no longer the untouchable genius who controls every room he enters. He's treated the same way Rick usually treats Morty. However, this scene ends in a very sudden and brutal way. Rick gets rid of genius Morty, and the whole thing is witnessed by Rick and Morty from Dimension C132. Unfortunately, I can't show the actual scene because of YouTube policies, but the moment is very violent and shocking, especially because it happened so quickly. Genius Morty is introduced as this fascinating new version of Morty, only for him to be removed almost immediately. Even though the scene is only around 4 pages long, it's interesting for several reasons. The first important thing is that it introduces a universe that seems to work as the opposite of the normal Rick and Morty structure. In the main multiverse, Rick is almost always the genius and Morty is usually the nervous sidekick. Even when Morty becomes smarter or more independent, he's usually still living in Rick's shadow. But in this universe, Morty is the Rick and Rick is the Morty. This makes Genius Morty very different from characters like Evil Morty. Evil Morty is special because he rejects the system that Rick's created. He understands that Rick's use Mortys and he wants to escape from the structure of the central finite curve. Genius Morty is different because he doesn't seem to be a Morty who became intelligent through rebellion, trauma, or manipulation. He appears to come from a universe where Morty being the genius is simply the natural order of things. The second important detail is the portal. While Rick C-132 travels to this universe, the portal is not the usual green color that we normally associate with Rick's portal gun. Instead, the portal is purple. This immediately makes the universe feel different from the standard multiverse locations we usually see. In Rick and Morty, portal colors can matter because they often suggest different types of travel, different technology, or different rules. Green portals are normally connected to Rick's usual interdimensional travel, so the fact that this portal is purple makes the entire scene feel separate from the normal system. Because of that, Genius Morty's universe may exist outside the central finite curve. The central finite curve was created to separate universes where Rick is the smartest person from the rest of infinity. That means the universes inside the curve are built around Rick's superiority. No matter how strange or different those realities are, Rick is still generally the dominant genius. However, Genius Morty's universe doesn't seem to follow that rule at all. In this world, Morty is the genius while Rick is the idiot. This is why the purple portal is so interesting. If Rick C-132 used a portal that looked different from the usual green portal, and if that portal led to a universe where Rick is not the smartest person, then it suggests that this universe might not belong to the same structure as the central finite curve. It could be a glimpse into a much larger multiverse where the rules are not designed around Rick. In that wider multiverse, there could be universes where Morty is the genius, Jerry is the genius, Summer is the genius, or Rick is completely irrelevant. Even though Genius Morty only appears briefly, his existence raises a lot of questions about the multiverse. If there's one universe where Morty is the genius and Rick is the idiot, then how many more are there? Was this universe outside the central finite curve? Did the Council of Mortys have access to realities that Rick's didn't fully control? And could there be other Mortys who are even smarter or more dangerous than Genius Morty? His story is short, but the implications are much bigger than the scene itself. Genius Morty proves that Morty isn't always destined to be Rick's weaker partner. In another universe, Morty can become the scientist, the leader, and the one who looks down on Rick. The only reason we don't usually see that kind of Morty is because the central finite curve was designed to protect Rick's place at the top. Genius Morty's universe seems to challenge that idea, even if only for a few pages. This is what makes him such an interesting version of Morty. He doesn't have a long arc, he doesn't lead a rebellion like Evil Morty, and he doesn't get the emotional focus of Dictator Morty. But in a very short amount of time, Genius Morty shows us a reality where the entire foundation of Rick and Morty is reversed. Rick is no longer the genius dragging Morty through dangerous adventures. Morty's the brilliant one, Rick is the embarrassing sidekick, and the whole universe seems to exist beyond the rules Rick normally uses to define reality. These alternate versions of Morty show that this dynamic is not as fixed as it first appears. Evil Morty became the first Morty to completely reject the system created by Rick's and successfully escape it. Dictator Morty showed what can happen when a Morty's resentment and desire for independence spiral into obsession. Genius Morty demonstrated that there are realities where Morty is not Rick's inferior at all, but the smartest person in the room. Despite their differences, all of these Mortys represent the same idea. They are what happens when Morty steps out of Rick's shadow. Some become heroes, some become tyrants, some become geniuses, but all of them prove that Morty is far more than the nervous teenager we met in the first episode.